Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ambassadorial Wing. And I hope y'all are having a great Saturday night. Back with y'all live once again. Of course, I am your host, the Ambassador. And tonight, we're going to be spending the next couple hours or so going over the latest Marvel MCU Disney Plus series, Moon Knight. And of course, if this is your first visit to the Ambassadorial Wing, I hope you enjoy your time here. Hope you enjoy the stream and the review. And if this is your first visit, I hope that throughout the course of this stream that you'll consider giving me a subscribe. Okay, that was complete and totally, utterly awful opening. Let's try that one more time. Once more with feeling. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And welcome back to the Ambassadorial Wing. And of course, I am your. We're going to be spending some time talking about the latest Marvel Studios Disney Plus series, Moon Knight. And of course, I am your host, the Ambassador. And if this is your first visit to the Ambassador Wing, I hope you enjoy your time here. And if you are a regular visitor here as well, good to have you here. Hope you enjoy the stream. And I will be dropping the link so that if you want to join me for this evening's review, hit that link, hop on in, and let's talk some Moon Knight. And to kind of kick this stream off, I just want to say I enjoyed this series. I have to say, of the Marvel Studios series that they have come out thus far, from WandaVision up until now, this is by far my favorite. And if you feel the way I do about Moon Knight, smash that like button, share this out with all of your fellow Marvel and MCU fans, and tell them this is where the fun is going to be tonight. So, but with all that being said, we do not stand on a whole lot of ceremony here. We're going to jump straight into the discussion. So, let's talk some Moon Knight. Now, a little transparency right up front. I have never read the Moon Knight comics. I will be honest, I am not terribly familiar with the character of Moon Knight. So I was going into this a little bit green, a little bit cold in terms of the back history of the character, where he came from, what his abilities are, and so on. And to say I was a little touch apprehensive at the casting of Oscar Isaacs and the character of Moon Knight, aka Mark Spector, aka Stephen Grant. Yes, I was a little apprehensive. You might be asking, why, Ambassador, were you apprehensive about Oscar Isaacs? He's a good actor. Well, one word. Well, several words, but one idea. Sequel trilogy. The last time I saw Oscar Isaacs in anything was the Star Wars sequel trilogy, where he played the character of Poe Dameron. Now, that's not to say that I dislike the character of Poe Dameron, far from it. But I had a few reservations as to whether or not he could pull this off. But considering his performance throughout all 6 episodes of Moon Knight, those reservations were quickly put to rest. And I will say this also. This is a somewhat unconventional, or very unconventional MCU series. Because Mark Spector, aka Stephen Grant, is not your atypical Marvel character by any stretch of the imagination. He is very, very atypical. And the interesting thing for me was I did do some research into the character. As I said, I did not read the comics, but I did do some research into the character to kind of familiarize myself with his backstory, with his history, and so on. So I was at least somewhat prepared for what we were going to get in terms of the character of Moon Knight. And I will say this. the hell? I'm completely frozen. Okay, there we go. For some reason, my screen froze. I have no idea why, but it did. But as I was saying, how did I feel about the character of Mark Spector? I think he was a very intriguing character. I liked the dynamic that they presented for Moon Knight in terms of where he came from, what he was doing at the time, and his alternate identity of Stephen Grant. Now, in terms of Isaac's dual performance for this series, how did I feel about it? It is not by any stretch easy to do a dual performance of two wholly different characters. But not only that, to portray in I think an accurate light the concept of a person with multiple personality disorder or just personality disorder in general. And at first, we don't know exactly why Mark Spector, aka Stephen Grant, or vice versa, has a dual personality. And the question is, we don't even know which is the dominant personality, even. And for me, the idea of a superhero with a personality disorder was a rather intriguing one. And I was very interested to see where they would take this character. And the journey that he goes on throughout this series, not to mention him coming to resolve the two sides of his personality, the primary personality and the alternate personality. It was an interesting journey. I really, as I said, I have to admit, I think Oscar Isaacs like I said, very quickly allayed my concerns about him being able to carry off a performance like this and not have it come off as campy or cheesy or unintentionally hilarious. Now, that's not to say that there isn't humor in this series. There is. But I think the humor is at times appropriate, but also somewhat more muted and everything, especially as we continue on through the series. Now, there's a lot to break down here, and just heads up now, this will be full spoilers. I will be talking about all 6 episodes, including the finale, which we got on Wednesday. So if you have not watched the full series yet, I will tell you this up front. Even if you are not necessarily a Marvel or DC or a comic book genre type of person, in this particular instance, you don't necessarily have to be. Because the superhero aspect isn't necessarily pushed to the back or pushed to the side, but it's also kind of secondary to the story. Now, granted, yes, obviously, this is an MCU series, but they deal with a personality disorder, they deal with psychiatric issues in I think, a very mature and a very real way. And obviously, we learn in the second to last episode of this series where the Stephen Grant persona comes from. And I do want to spend a little time talking about that, and we'll go ahead and do that right now. For those of you that watched the entire series all the way through, we find out that sadly Mark Spector was abused as a child. And sadly was abused by the one person you would hope would never abuse him. And that sadly was his mother. Now there is some tragedy in Mark's past. And due to necessarily no fault of his own, him and his little brother get into a situation, and unfortunately, his little brother dies. His little brother drowns. And Mark's mother carries a large bit of resentment towards him for the death of his brother. And that sends her down a path to where she's extremely, well, there's no way to sugarcoat this. She's extremely physically and emotionally and verbally abusive to Mark. And Mark's coping mechanism is to create this alternate persona, Stephen Grant, or Stevie, or Steve as he calls him, to shield himself, to shield his part of his psyche from all that abuse. And I say this to anybody that has ever had to suffer through parental abuse. You have my complete and utter sympathy. And while I cannot relate, because thankfully I never had to deal with anything like that in my own life, you have my utmost empathy. Because a child should never, ever, ever be abused by a parent or anyone else. That's just a given. When you bring a child into the world, you're supposed to care for them, you're supposed to love them, you're supposed to protect them. You're not supposed to be a source of pain and a source of misery. But I digress. I'll go get off my soapbox here. But what we have at the start of this series, and I'm going to be flipping backwards and forwards throughout the course of this review, is we find, well, who we know as Stephen Grant, working as a clerk in a museum in London, I think particularly a natural history museum or a history museum in London as a gift shop clerk, essentially. But he has a real thirst and a real passion for Egyptology and world history, and he wants to be able to give the tours to the people who come in, to the guests. But he has a supervisor who won't even give him a snowball's chance in hell at doing that. Now, throughout the course of the first few episodes, Stephen has these moments or episodes where he blacks out. And in the aftermath of him blacking out, you see these scenes or aftermaths of these massive assaults or battles or whatever the case may be, where lots of people are injured or dead or both. And Steve doesn't understand why this keeps happening. But as we find out, he has a personality that the alternate personality is a mercenary, a soldier of fortune, whatever you want to call it. And this is a person that's highly trained, highly capable, very skilled, very deadly. And this alternate personality is Mark Spector. Now, Mark has a life separate from Steve. He has a wife named Layla, who we meet, I think it's like the second or third episode into the series and everything. We'll meet in person and everything. And she's like, "Where the hell have you been, Mark?" And Steve's like, who is this Mark you keep talking about? Because the interesting thing for Steve is he doesn't realize that there's an entirely other part of his personality that is present. He eventually learns it, but it's all foreign to him. And that's where I think they handled the disassociation between the two personalities very well. Because for a person who does suffer from, and I will use that terminology deliberately here, a person who suffers from personality disassociation or personality disorder, oftentimes sometimes they will not be aware of the other personalities. It can happen that they are cognizant of the other personalities that dwell within them, but they don't necessarily know how many they are, what they're like, or anything of the sort. And in Steven's case, the Mark persona, the primary persona, is, like I said, a mercenary. And Steven being a much more down to earth and level headed and non-violent, very passive individual. Minor note, he's a vegan. All these sights of blood and carnage and people being hurt or killed is all very shocking or traumatic to him. He's not accustomed to it. And small side note, but one that I will delve into more so later on during the review. The fight choreography for this series, I will say, is some of the very best, because it's how a special forces or a mercenary who has gone through all sorts of weapons training, hand-to-hand combat training, and defensive and offensive driving and so on would be capable of. But the interesting thing is, you have a person who can do all this, but yet has a personality that is completely unaccustomed to all of it. So when the Steven personality pops in, he's completely thrown off guard. He doesn't know what he's going. He doesn't understand what just happened or anything else. For him, it's a complete and utter blackout. He has no memory of what happened before, and he's having to ask people around him what the hell happened. And all of them are like, "What do you mean, what the hell happened? You just beat the ever living crap out of some of us and killed us." But for Steve, it's an experience that he has no connection to, because it's Mark that's doing this, not him. Now, the other thing I will mention here, and something actually that I want to dig into a little bit further. Mark has had to deal with a lot of trauma in his life, obviously from his youth up until now. And we see, particularly in the 5th episode, that when his mother finally dies, he can't even bring himself to walk back in the house. He can't do it. He doesn't want to do it, because he has suffered so much abuse and so much trauma at the hands of someone that was supposed to love him and care for him, and who I imagine up until a certain point in his life did do so, but then had such a dramatic change in personality due to the death of a child, particularly Steve's brother, that she becomes incredibly abusive. Now, granted, we never see any overt signs of physical abuse during the course of the series, and in particular in episode 5. But there was one particular scene I found very interesting and very poignant. It's when Steven and Mark are reliving their past, or Steve and Mark's past specifically, when they're in the afterlife with the Egyptian goddess Taweret. And I will get into the Egyptian aspect of the Egyptology, the ancient Egypt aspect of the series and everything a little bit here. But the thing I have to say is that entire sequence, in particular, when Mark creates the Steven personality and he uses it for like the very first time, and Steven and Mark are watching as he's sitting, as young Mark is saying, huddled in the corner of his bedroom, and his mother's being against the door, and she finally breaks in, and she's got a belt in her hand, and Mark pulls Steven out of the room, and he's like, "Nope, you're not supposed to see this." He's shielding himself from his own trauma. He's shielding the other side of his personality from his own trauma, because he doesn't want to ruin that perception that Steven has of his mother. And I found that to be very interesting because it's almost like Steven is protecting another person from seeing someone being abused. But the issue is this: he's the one being abused. But the disassociation between the two personalities is so strong and so prominent that Mark literally views Steven as a wholly separate person. And in fact, when Steven and Mark end up in the afterlife on Tawillet's um, barge, or well, yeah, or ship, as they're sailing to the afterlife, or what we know as the afterlife for the ancient Egyptians, the field of reeds. Stephen is personified as a completely separate individual. He's no longer a separate part of Mark. He is his own person. And I found that particular part of this series very interesting, particularly in this regard. Because being someone who doesn't suffer from this disorder, and that's what it is everything is it's a personality disorder. It seems very unorthodox to me, but I imagine to a clinical psychologist, it would seem rather rational, rather normal in terms of someone who does have personality disassociation or multiple personality disorder, whichever the proper clinical um, term would be for this issue that Mark has. And it's actually how Taweret and the rest of the Egyptian pantheon regards the two. They are two separate individuals. Mark is very assertive, very aggressive, highly trained, highly motivated, very self assured. Although he does have his foibles, he does have his faults, in particular when it comes to his relationship with Layla El Foodli. I hope I'm saying that right. If I butcher Layla's last name, I am sorry. No disrespect intended. Just sometimes I have a little bit of a problem with last names. And he's always trying to shield Layla from Khonshu. Now, I guess this is a good time as any, and we'll come back to Mark's situation in a little while. But one aspect of this series I very much appreciated, that I really, really enjoyed, was the inclusion of the ancient Egyptian pantheon, particularly the gods and their mythology and so on. And you have two prominent Egyptian gods um, in this series. You have Khonshu, voiced by F. Murray Abraham. And when I found out that F. Murray Abraham did the voice of Khonshu, I was like, I thought that voice sounded familiar. Now, for those of you who might not be very familiar with F. Murray Abraham, he is an actor who has been around for a very, very long time. Very talented, very well rounded, both movie and stage actor. He has been in numerous films, and a couple I'll mention right here. I think one that I actually made him obey. For those of you that tune in regularly, me and Zach Leary did a review of Scarface a few weeks ago. F. Murray Abraham has a small part in that film, but he also has a more prominent role in a film that I'm going to be doing a review for next month, and that is, of course, Amadeus, which is a historical dramatization of the supposed rivalry between Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and Antonio Salieri. And F. Murray Abraham portrays Salieri, and he actually won an Oscar for his portrayal, and I would say not unduly so. But Everett Abraham as the voice of Khonshu, he did a bang up job. He very much did. Now Khonshu is not a god from the Egyptian pantheon that I was terribly familiar with. Not to mention was either Tawedit or Amet. Amenet, excuse me. But the design of each of the characters, each of the gods, I thought was really cool. It really much was in the keeping with how the gods might have looked at the time of their when they were in their prominence, when they were in their power, and so on. And this whole idea that the Egyptian gods are still around, keeping an eye on humanity and so on, but staying out of the way, essentially, kind of like you could almost say in a much of a similar way as the Eternals did. So, but and I'm not quite sure who did the voice of Amit, but I will, give me just a minute and I will look that up. But that this whole aspect, the whole treasure hunt, the whole search for Amit's tomb, um, the I would almost put this as kind of an Indiana Jones esque type adventure, except with the main character having a personality disorder, was actually really intriguing. It's something that we have not really seen in the MCU so far. I mean, we've had touches of mythology in the series, particularly with Black Panther, which is actually mentioned during the series, the Moon Knight series, particularly in episode 5, when Taweda mentions the I forget exactly what's the name of the ancestral glade or something, whatever it is, where all the kings of Wakanda go after they die. Essentially, it's where T'Challa goes um, to visit his father, and Taweda mentions that. But I digress. Give me just a minute because I do want to look up the actress who did this. Actress. Minute in. Ah, there we go. Okay. Uh, all right. Okay, this comes from Screen Rant, and I think obviously they're relatively okay. Let's see. Isaac, Ethan Hawke. Okay, Amit. I actually pronounced the name incorrectly. My apologies, folks. Let's see. Okay. Okay. The name of the actress is Saba Mukabra. Um, an actress I'm not terribly familiar with. I'll be upfront with you, but I will say this: the actress she did Macabre did the I think did a very good job. And, she really gave this idea of the fact that she is someone who wants to rid the world of evil, but she also wants to rid the world of free will. Because you see, Khonshu and Amit are kind of the two sides of the same coin. Khonshu wants to punish people who cause evil, but Amit wants to kill people before they even have an opportunity to do evil of any kind. Where Khonshu wants to give the people an opportunity to possibly turn away from any evil acts that they might potentially go for, Amit wants to completely erase a person, kill a person, before they can do any evil at all. And I think that's a very interesting discussion on the concept of free will. And I'll go into a little bit of that right here. Because we as people we believe that we all have that we have free will, that we can choose the path that our life will go on. And in many ways, this is true. We do have a free will, whether you regard it as something that we are just have inherently, whether it's something that is a gift from God or whatever. But ultimately, what we have in terms of Aminet and Khonshu punishes the people who have already done evil and deserve to be punished for their offense. Amit punishes people and even infants and children who have done no evil whatsoever, but who could potentially do evil because she looks into their future without regarding the idea that they might have a change of heart, that they could potentially change and turn around and do good in their lives and not commit any evil at all. And during the final battle in episode 6, Amit is like, we can rule side by side, we can make this world a better place, we can rid the world of all evil. And Khonshu is like, no, because that is not how I work. That's not how I function. You're robbing people of free will. I only punish those who deserve it. And it begs the question, who is right? Now, speaking as a moral and an ethical person, and a person who believes in the exercise of free will, I would say that Khonshu is right here. Now, we might have some issues, and I wouldn't necessarily say unjustifiably so, in how Khonshu goes about excising or exercising his power or his justice in the world, in particular with Mark Spector and Stephen Grant, and also his previous avatar, Arthur Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke, and I'll get into him in here in just a minute, but I want to stick with this point here. Now, Khonshu eventually, and I imagine he would down the road, pick a more suitable avatar, someone whose mental faculties are in the right order and who doesn't suffer from the personality issues that Mark Spector does. So while we don't disagree necessarily with how Khonshu treats Stephen or Mark, I would say we can at least agree on what he is doing. He is punishing evil. He is punishing injustice. And that's not a wrong thing to do. But at the same time, he is very verbally abusive to Stephen. Granted, to him, Stephen is the interloper here in his work. He is the one getting in the way. It's Mark that he wants, not Stephen. And during the course of the series, we see Mark and Stephen battle back and forth about being the dominant personality until finally the two of them are able to reconcile, make amends, and function as a whole person. And I will say this, in the final battle in episode 6, when you see Mark and Layla and Steve tag teaming and fighting Amit's goons, seeing the transition between Steve and Mark is actually really cool, because obviously you have the two different costume designs. You have the classic Moon Knight look, and then you have the Mr. Knight, the more dapper, well dressed version of Moon Knight and everything when Steve is in control. And seeing them finally be able to coexist is a really cool thing. Now, I will say this also. This this series does have at the very end its own kaiju fight, because you have a giant-sized Khonshu and a giant-sized Ammit fighting near the Great Pyramids in Egypt. And the visuals of that are nothing short of just really inducing just joy. Just I was like, this is really badass. I love this. But um getting back a little bit to my previous point. What we have with the duality of Khonshu and Ammit really is a question of who is right. Is Khonshu more right in in that he punishes people who have already done evil? Granted, he punishes people after the fact, whereas Ammit judges a person's entire lifetime regardless of what they may or may not be doing. And ultimately, she robs a person of any choice. It almost goes back to that old question, that old hypothetical question. If you had the opportunity to kill Hitler as a child or a young man, would you do it? Now, in Amit's point of view, yes, there's no question. You instantaneously, if you have the opportunity to stop Hitler from committing all the atrocities that he would commit in his life, then that is justified in Amit's view. Whereas Khonshu might say no. Now, granted, Khonshu, we don't know the length and breadth of Khonshu's abilities as an Egyptian god. We don't know if he can see a person's entire past, present, and future in the same way that Amit can. But what is really interesting is the fact that Mark, not once but twice, willingly agrees to be Khonshu's avatar. Although there are some conditions the second time around. And the one thing I will say is, if I was in Mark's shoes, would I make the same choice to be Khonshu's avatar to punish people who do evil, even though they do it after the fact? Yes. Being a person who believes in right and wrong, good and evil, justice and injustice. Yeah, I would honestly agree to be Khonshu's avatar. More so than I would agree to be Amit's avatar, much less be a follower of her ideals. Now that brings us to another point, and that is, of course, the character of Arthur Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke. Now, the first time we meet Arthur Harrow is early on. This is obviously in the first episode, and we see him crushing glass for some unknown reason and putting it into his sandals. And that seems very unorthodox. Why in the world would he do this? Makes no sense. But during the course of this series, we really delve into who Harrow is. Now, obviously, he is a very devout follower of Amit. He believes in what she believes in. She believes in what she espouses. She he judges people in the name of Amit. He has this, I will say, he has this very cool cane and everything that has at first it has a twin headed crocodile's handle at the top of the cane. And what he does is he puts the candle on a person, the cane handle on a person's wrists, and it judges them if they have done right or done wrong, and ultimately, if the scales balance, they're allowed to live. If the scales are imbalanced, well, you can make the guess. But Haru feels completely justified in what he does, and again, it begs the question: which is the right course of action? Punish injustice after the fact, or punish injustice before it could even potentially happen? But the character of Haru himself, and I will say this also of Ethan Hawke, it has been a very long time since I've seen Ethan Hawke in anything, television or movie otherwise. They got the right actor for this part. Ethan Hawke brought a lot of weight to the character. His portrayal, I think, was very on point. Grant, I'm not terribly familiar with the character of Haru, but at the same time, Ethan Hawke's portrayal of this character was it was really on point. So, and I want to say hello to the chat, Orville Nation. Orville, it's good to see you. We're talking Moon Knight this evening. I decided instead of doing a weekly review, I wanted to just do one review, cover the entire series, and give my thoughts on it. And for anybody that watched it and wanted to join me, I put the link in the chat and everything. So, Orville, yeah, it's good to see you too, buddy. It's been a while, so hope you're doing well. And a short aside, I don't know if I ever got a chance to tell you this, but I finally was able to get both seasons 1 and 2 of Orville on not Blu-ray, on DVD. And as soon as I can make the time to do it, I am going to sit down and watch it, because on your recommendation, on the recommendation of a lot of other people, I'm going to check it out. So, but for however long you're here, Orville, appreciate you stopping by. So, and glad you're here. I've missed you, buddy. So, but anyway, that being said, let's get back into it. The character of Haru was once an avatar of Khonshu, as we learn. The only problem, Orville, is I don't have Hulu. Right now, it's just not in the budget for another streaming series. So what I'll probably do once it comes out on DVD or Blu-ray is I'll pick it up then, and I'll review it. I may even do once I get around to watching seasons 1 and 2. I'll definitely do reviews of those. Just like I said, just gotta make the time to do it. So, but with the character of Haru, he is not your atypical MCU villain. And I will say this in terms of the evolution of the villains within the MCU. So, we'll do Orville. Thank you, buddy. I'll get in touch with you after I get done here. So, he has a lot of complexity to him, and that's what makes him, I think, one of the more interesting villains in the MCU. Now, starting out with Obadiah Stane and just working our way through, and in particular with the streaming series with the villains there. I mean, obviously, in WandaVision, Wanda was seemingly the villain. With Falcon Winter Soldier, you had Sharon Carter, aka the Power Broker, and you also had the Flag Smashers. With let's see, what was the next one? With Loki, it was, well, obviously Kang, and to a lesser extent Sylvie. But of all the villains that we have gotten thus far in the MCU, both cinema and streaming, I'd have to put Haro in my top five. He is just that interesting, that complex, and obviously that well portrayed and well written as a character. Now, there are several moments in this series, in particular with Haro, that stuck out to me. When he actually is called by the Egyptian gods when um they're trying to decide what to do with Khonshu and whether or not the threat of Ammit is legitimate or not. They call both Khonshu and they call his current avatar and his past avatar, and this past avatar obviously is Haro. And after the other gods imprison Khonshu in his Shopti, the little stone statuette, Haro's talking to him, and he's like, I want you to know that all the abuse, all the belittling, all the bereavement that you did to me while I was your avatar turned me into what I am today, and I have you to owe to my ultimate victory. Because Haro is obviously someone who has suffered some sort of trauma in his past as well, and I would actually be kind of interested to see some of the back history on Haro to kind of get an idea of exactly what happened to him, both in his past, before he was the avatar of Khonshu, and during his time as Khonshu's avatar. Because there's a lot there that we don't get an idea of. Now, I'm not saying that Khonshu is necessarily a completely upright and decent entity as an Egyptian god. No, he is very, I will say, he can be at times very abrasive, almost bordering on verbally abusive. But when you're as single minded as Khonshu is, when you've been kind of cast out from the rest of the Egyptian god pantheon, when you're kind of the black sheep of the family, you do develop a chip on your shoulder. And that's how I would kind of categorize Khonshu here. I think Khonshu himself, even as an Egyptian god, does suffer from some sort of trauma in his past. And we obviously know what this trauma is. He was cast out because he was doing things that the other Egyptian gods didn't care for. And when that sort of thing happens to you, you become very resentful. You become very antagonistic. And you become very hard edged to the point where you have a hard time relenting at anything. And not to get too terribly personal here, but I'll say this briefly. I have a cousin on my mom's side of the family who I love very dearly. And for those of you who have followed me on social media and who have and everything been tuning in lately, you all know that back in April we had a death in the family. It was my mom's brother, my uncle. This one cousin, she has had to deal with a lot emotionally. And I love her. I love her to death. She is my family. She is my kin, even though she doesn't necessarily regard me as her kin because, well, for those of you who know, I was adopted. But I love her just the same. But it's very hard to be around her at times. And that's how I kind of see Khonshu here. he has tried to do the right thing by humanity all this time, and all he has done is gotten his teeth kicked in for his trouble. He's been berated, he's been belittled, he's been kicked out of the from the company of the other Egyptian gods, and has made him very bitter, has made him very angry, and not unjustifiably so, because it is those that are closest to you that can hurt you the most, that can hurt you the deepest. And that's where my comparison to Khonshu and my cousin comes into play. Because I love my cousin. I would like to talk to her more often. But oftentimes it goes so sideways so quickly that it's almost counterproductive and it doesn't really go anywhere. And the same is true with Khonshu. Because he has a single way of looking at the world and a single way of looking at how things should be. He's obviously a god of justice and vengeance. So he's going to be very hardwired to that mentality, to that way of thinking. But at the same time, it has made him very hard for his avatars to deal with him for any length of time. So you could almost say that in a lot of ways, Khonshu might potentially be attracted or drawn to people who have trauma in their own lives. And that's who he chooses as his avatars because they themselves are just as damaged or maybe even more damaged than he already is. And that is a sad thing to see. You know, for all the action and all of the adventure in this series, and don't get me wrong, that is, it was very well done in this particular instance. But what I really enjoyed about Moon Knight was the character studies, the delving into the background in each and every one of the different characters, whether it was Layla, whether it was Mark or Steven, whether it was Haro, whether it was Khonshu. These are all people who have suffered some sort of trauma in their life. And they are trying to both survive, they are trying to live, and they are trying to function as as close to as a normal human being you and me would. And that's not easy for them because they are broken. They have baggage. They have unresolved issues in their past. And they can't seem to get past them. And that for me, I think is honestly one of the strengths of this series. The fact that not only do you get a really cool action adventure superhero story, but you get a picture of how a person who is dealing with past trauma, who has developed a alternate personality to cope with their trauma, and how that can ultimately impact them if they do become a superhero. And that honestly is one of the reasons why I have enjoyed the MCU as much as I have. It's not about the crazy theories about what could or could not be going on in a particular story. It is the journey of these characters. Now, I will get back into the series proper here in just a minute, guys. I'm just doing a short little side here, just to give you a heads up. But the interesting thing, looking at all of these different series from both, well, let's just stick to the streaming series thus far. To one degree or another, they are dealing with broken people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. You look at Wanda. Here was a young woman who suffered so much loss in her life, lost her brother, lost the love of her life, that being the Vision, and all she wanted to do was curl up and just live out a normal life. And in turn, and if we jump forward to Stephen and Mark, Stephen just wanted a normal, ordinary life where he had someone special and close to him in his life. And yet he had this issue that he could not fully explain. And that, of course, was the whole issue of the personality disorder, where he is the secondary personality and Mark is the primary. But he wants to exist. He wants to live. He wants to have some sort of autonomy and say in his life. And the funny thing is, by the end of the series, Steven and Mark have that. So, and Price is Right reviews. You are never late. You are always early. So, appreciate you stopping by. Hope you enjoy the rest of the review and everything. I'll be going for a little bit longer here. I still got quite a bit I want to cover in terms of my thoughts on Moon Knight. So, we're talking about Moon Knight tonight. Price. I will be doing a review of Doctor Strange next weekend. Me and Madam Ambassador are going to be celebrating our 7-year anniversary, or wedding anniversary next weekend. And we decided as our night out or whatever, we're going to go see Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness. And then we're going to do our review and everything of it next weekend. So tonight's going to be primarily Moon Knight. So, but I might be bouncing around just for context's sake to some of the other MCU's streaming series. So, but of course, Price, check the title, check the crawl, Moon Knight review. But anyway, I digress. All these characters have some sort of trauma. And eventually, to one degree or another, that trauma is resolved. Now, one character I have not discussed, and no, I haven't been necessarily stalling on that, just working through the series as we went. We, of course, have the character of Layla, Mark's wife, or, well, ex-wife, or whatever her current status is in terms of her relationship with Mark. And we come to find out that Layla was actually the daughter of a very prominent archaeologist. And unfortunately, and rather sadly, Mark was unintentionally responsible for the death of Layla's father. And it's kind of the same situation that Mark had to face when he was a kid in terms of what happened to his brother. He did not cause his brother's death, but he was unintentionally connected to it. He didn't necessarily, it wasn't his fault, and he was having such a difficult time, which I imagine most people would have a difficult time trying to forgive themselves for what happened. But when we're children, we really seem to internalize trauma and things that we might have been unintentionally a part of, and we might feel the blame for. And that's true of Mark not once but twice in his life. And in both instances, it hurt someone very close to him. In the terms of his little brother, it was himself and his parents. In the terms of Layla, excellent. Glad to hear that, Price. So, Um, hope to have you on the board and everything at some point. So, but I Price, I will say this: I don't know if you have Disney Plus or whatever the case may be, but even though I'm going to be spoiling this series, I would still encourage you go check out the show because it is as I mentioned before you came in, I think this is one of the strongest MCU series thus far. But getting back to Layla, she herself is dealing with a lot of issues in regards to her relationship with Mark. And Mark is always trying to protect her, to shield her, to keep her from becoming Khonshu's avatar after he's done with his time as in that role, in that position. But she's like, I don't need you to protect me. I just need you to be open and honest with me. That's what I need and want from you most of all, Mark. And she's like, and there's in particular in episode 5 when she finds out that Mark didn't kill her father, but he was the one that led the rest of the mercenaries to the camp where her father was at. And he's like, I didn't know it was your dad. I didn't know who he was in relation to you. And that's why I came to you in the first place. But we ended up falling in love. It's not that Mark doesn't care about Layla, he very much does. But when she comes to that realization, it completely um let's see. So any film reviews I'm a fan of or know a lot about, I'm down to stream for. I'll take your word on and check it out though. I used to have Disney Plus, but due to obvious reasons. I understand where you're coming from, Price. And here's the thing. Do I agree with some of the things that Disney is necessarily doing? No, I don't. But I have to ask myself this other question. Do I want to punish a group of artists, in this case, actors, directors, people that worked on the production of this show? Do I want to punish them for the, for lack of a better term, sins of the company that they work for? No, because one does not inherently have anything to do with the other. The people that work on these shows are just trying to make a living, just trying to eke out a means to provide for themselves and for their families if they're able to. So that's often how I reconcile that sort of thing. Now, if you disagree with me, you know what? Fair enough. You disagree with me. I'm not going to berate you for it. But I have been a longtime fan of the MCU. I have been a lifelong fan of Marvel in general. And yes, I'm going to watch these shows. Yes, I'm going to dissect them. I'm going to review them. I'm going to discuss them. And I'm going to enjoy them. Because I try to be the voice of moderation here. I try to be the voice of, to one degree or another, reason here in terms of how I view these series. I don't look at it as some sort of quote unquote woke propaganda. I got you, buddy. I got you. I understand. But to just wrap up my thought on this particular point very quickly, I am not here to fight anybody's culture war. I am not here to call out woke and anti woke. I'm not here to spout some sort of BS propaganda or anything else. I'm simply here to discuss these shows, discuss these movies, and discuss other aspects of pop culture that I love, that I enjoy, that have been a part of my life since I was young. I'm not here on YouTube for the same reasons that a lot of other people are. I'm not here for the drama. I'm not here for all that other nonsense. My life as it is interesting enough without a bunch of infighting, a bunch of other people on the internet and on YouTube or on Twitter or whatever. Y'all want to fight and bicker and whatever? Go for it. Be my guest. Here, I'm here to enjoy myself and enjoy talking with other people who have similar interests to me. But I digress. Back to MoonKnight. Layla obviously has her own baggage. She is trying to reconcile with Mark. Obviously, she has divorce papers. She's trying to divorce herself from Mark. And because she's tired of him hiding things from her. Even though his intentions are seemingly good, she doesn't want to be shielded from everything. She just wants Mark to be honest with her. And that's not an unreasonable request on her part. And now, obviously, she's very independent. She's very capable. Obviously, they worked together before as archaeologists. She obviously knows. I can't recall exactly if she knew that Mark was a mercenary, but considering his skill set, his ability to take care of himself, I can't necessarily imagine that she doesn't. But what I found interesting about Layla is that she becomes a somewhat reluctant superhero. Because in episode 6, Tawedit is trying to tell her, look, you can be my avatar. I can help you be able to survive this fight and participate in it and help you be able to do the right thing here by everybody. And eventually, Layla agrees. She becomes Tawedit's avatar. And I will admit, her costume was actually, the design of it was really cool. And the fight, her capacity to, her ability to fight was very believable. Now, obviously, she got some added advantages from being Tawedit's avatar and so on. And I will say this overall, I liked Layla's character. I did. I liked how she fit into the story. She was, I think, at least very believable and very relatable and somewhat likable. You could see a little bit of the softer side of her personality when Steven was the prominent personality that she was interacting with. But when Mark was the prominent personality, her demeanor very much changed. She was somewhat more combative, but at the same time, she wasn't antagonistic. She was just trying to get Mark to open up to her, to talk to her, to reason with her, to try and have him tell her what's going on in his life and what's going on in the situation that they're in. And Mark's doing everything in his power to try and protect her. Kind of the same way that he's trying to protect Steven, aka protect himself. And when we find out that the only reason Mark eventually found her was he was trying to track down any relatives of the archaeologists that he killed. That's how he came in contact with Layla, and when she realizes this, it absolutely shatters her. She's like, the only reason you're with me, the only reason you found me was out of guilt. And he's like, no, that's not completely true. He's like, I did care about you. I do care about you now. I love you very much. But this other aspect is also true. And, you know, on one hand, I understand the shock and trauma that she's going through. That's just a given. But on the other hand, her reaction is very surprising, very jarring, because they're in this life and death situation, and you're like, come on, snap out of it. You've got more important things to worry about. You finally got what you needed to to get out of this whole mess with Haro, and you're just standing around a crypt arguing. But I think on Haru's part, him playing on Layla's insecurities, playing on her doubts and her suspicions, was actually, I think, very ingenious move as on his part. Now, granted, I think a lot of us would agree that Haru's tactics are somewhat distasteful, but at the same time, they're very well played off. Or they turned out rather well in his favor. Now, there is, like I said, I did want to get to this part of the series and everything, and I think this is as good a time as any. The whole archaeological adventure aspect of the series. Now, we start off with snippets here and there in the first couple of episodes and everything, but when I think it's in episode 2 or episode 3 when Mark finally gets to Egypt. Excuse me. That's when the archaeological adventure really kicks in. This is when it kind of becomes a hybrid of the MCU and Indiana Jones and maybe just a touch of the Mummy. Now, the Brendan Fraser Mummy, not the Tom Cruise Mummy. There's only one series of Mummy films that are actually, well, technically 2 series of Mummy films are actually decent. That's the original black and whites and the Hammer ones, and the ones with Brendan Fraser. Tom Cruise didn't do very well with his. Just saying. But speaking as someone who is a student of history, who has studied Egyptology, who has a spouse, I'm an ambassador, who is a huge fan, I guess that's the right term, is a huge fan of ancient Egyptian mythology, who taught herself how to read the Book of the Dead. Not the Book of the Dead from the Mummy. This is a different actual factual book, not a work of fiction. But seeing how they integrated that particular part, those particular aspects of ancient Egyptian mythology into the series, I honestly thought was really cool. Not to mention the fact that when they finally reached the tomb where Amet Shopti, the little stone statuette that she was imprisoned in, it turns out to be the final resting place of, well, I was honestly kind of shocked, but it's the final resting place of Alexander the Great. Now, short little history lesson. Most everybody here, I imagine, knows who Alexander the Great is. He was the king of Macedonia, and at the time, the known world. He had never lost a battle. He was revered almost as like a demigod. He believed he was descended from Hercules and Zeus and all of them. A little bit crazy, a little bit, but in terms of military strategy, yeah, for his time, he was brilliant. And being someone who had conquered what was known at that time as the known world, he was regarded as an Egyptian pharaoh. And as such, when he died, he was given a Egyptian burial. That means full mummification, at least in this particular context. I don't know if this actually happened in real life with Alexander the Great's body when he died. I'll have to do some looking into that. But the fact that they kind of mix that particular piece of world history, even if it is fictionalized, into this story, I really appreciated. Now, there's the other part of this scenario thing that I want to discuss, and that is the concept of the ancient Egyptian afterlife, which we see in episode 5. In particular, when Stephen and Mark wake up and they are in a what we presume is a mental institution, I will put it that way. And they're trying to escape from Haro, they're trying to get out of the place, and then they reach this pair of double doors, and you see this massive shadow coming trudging towards the doors. The doors swing open, you see this giant hippopotamus dressed in ancient Egyptian clothing and ornamentation, and then you hear this high pitched voice say, "Hi." You're like, okay, didn't expect that, and then we find out it's the Egyptian goddess Taweret. Now, I did ask the missus what this particular goddess God was in charge of, quote unquote. What was Taweret the goddess of? And it comes to find out that she is the goddess of women and children and fertility and motherhood and all those sorts of things. And I guess in a roundabout way, that does make sense. Because in many instances, Mark and Steven are still somewhat childlike in the how they are dealing with trauma. But, you know, them incorporating ancient Egyptian myth and the pantheon of gods into this series, it was honestly really cool. It was, as someone who loves that world, who is a fan of that period in world history, the effort was not lost on me. And the authenticity of the design of a lot of the sets and the design of the characters, in particular with Khonshu and Amit and Tawedit, it was right on point. It really, really was. I will say one of my favorite sets from the entire series is the inner chamber inside the Great Pyramid, where the different gods' avatars gather to confer and so on at various times. That particular set, I absolutely positively love. I do. It is gorgeous. It is absolutely just steeped in ancient Egyptian iconography and statuary and everything else. And that would be, you know what? If I was going to design a man cave, I would almost design it to look like that, statuary and all. But I would just like incorporate a couple of really comfy recliners or theater quality seats, a nice TV, a nice viewing screen, or a big, like a really big screen, flat screen TV or something like that. But that would be almost my ideal man cave. That or something themed after Star Wars as well. For those of you who know, I love Star Wars, but this them having to balance out all these different aspects in this series and it being, at least from my perspective, I think very successful is no small feat. because you're dealing with characters that have varying degrees of psychological trauma that they are dealing with. You have a impending threat, that being, of course, the release of Amit by Haro and his group. You've got Khonshu and the other gods there contending against one another. Now, I will say this: one of my favorite scenes in this, there are several scenes during this series I really appreciated. I think it's like episode 3 or 4, where they finally get the map put together to find Amit's tomb. It can only be it can only be used at a particular time when the stars are aligned in a particular way. And you see Khonshu and Steve in the Mr. Knight costuming, reversing the sky. That to me was a really cool visual. I won't lie to you all. I was like, now this is how I think how a god manipulates time. Just with a gesture of his hands, and he reverses the night sky almost 2 or 3 thousand years, so that they can figure out where Amit's tomb is. Now, fortunately, it's due to these actions that Khonshu is encased in his Shopti, although it is temporarily. But some of the visuals for this series were, the people who worked on this, they did a bang up job. They really, really did. Of course, I have not come to expect any less from the people that work at Marvel Studios, who work on the visual effects, who work on the sets and so on for these series and for these movies. But with this one, they really did something interesting. Now, there are a few other points that I want to cover, but everything. For a while I was watching this, had this theory that this series doesn't take place in the main MCU universe. And here's why. Let me give y'all my my thoughts here. 1, there's no reference or mention to any other heroes in the MCU. The Avengers aren't mentioned. Doctor Strange is not mentioned. Nobody. The only references we have to anything in the main MCU universe is the city of Madripoor and the ancestral savannah from Black Panther. But if the multiverse dynamic functions as we understand it in the MCU, then all the universes would have their own version of Madripoor, and if the ancestral savannah or the ancestral Glen is multidimensional or spans dimensions, then it's going to exist everywhere. Now, I could be entirely wrong, and here's the counterpoint to my other points here. During the big final battle between Amina and Khonshu and Layla and Mark and Haro, Layla saves a group of civilians, and amongst those bystanders, let's put it that way, saves a group of bystanders. And there's a young woman that she saves, and she asks Layla, "Are you a Egyptian superhero?" And Layla says, "Yeah, sorta." Now, the term superhero only exists to, I would imagine, to people who are familiar with the concept of superheroes just in general. So that begs the question: does the Moon Knight series take place in the main MCU, but is so far removed from everything else that has gone on? Because let's be honest, Moon Knight is somewhat of a lower level tier character. He doesn't have a lot of contact with the more prominent characters in the MCU because there's no mention of the snap, there's no mention of the blip, there's no mention of Asheram appearing above the earth in the Eternals. There's no mention of anything in the main MCU continuity. We don't hear any news reports about anything that may have potentially happened that might be concurrent with Moon Knight. Nothing. So, either they did one of two things with this series. Either Moon Knight takes place in an alternate dimension and is not connected to the main MCU continuity, which, if that's the case, okay, cool. They're using the multiverse concept appropriately here. Or Moon Knight is such a low level character that he would not necessarily register on the other superheroes' radar. Or here's one other possibility. Let me see. Let me figure out how I want to word this. Let's say the main focus of this series is not even to attach to the main MCU, at least not right now. What if, no pun intended, when they wrote this series, they didn't consider tying it in directly or making any mentions of anything that's happened previously in the main MCU continuity? Like I said, no snap, no blip, no Thanos, no Ultron, no nothing. It's just its own isolated story, but it's still in the main MCU. And you have a couple little dialogue cues to tell you, yes, this does take place in the main MCU, or it could take place in a alternate dimension. Ooh, excuse me. Now, considering the reception of this series, do I think that they will be doing a season 2? I don't see a reason why they potentially couldn't. But if they do, I would like to see them do something that's going to be worthwhile. I want to see them do a story that's going to matter. I don't want them to just do whatever they want to do. I'd rather them see it do a story that actually builds on the world, builds on the universe, and gives us a meaningful season 2 to Moon Knight. Do I think this is a character that's worth revisiting? Yeah, and in particular with the fact that we are introduced to another character that Concha uses as his avatar. I can't remember the name of the character off the top of my head, but it is, of course, portrayed by Oscar Isaacs. So, but if they decide to do a season 2 of Moon Knight, I'll watch it happily. The other thing I will say is this. Do I think they will eventually incorporate Moon Knight into the main MCU? Again, they potentially could. And would I like to see Oscar Isaacs come back for this or potentially another role in the MCU? Yeah. Based on his performance here, Isaacs really, really did a bang up job. He really honestly did. I appreciated his performance. And I appreciated the effort that he put into it. Excuse me. Sorry, folks. But if I was going to give Moon Knight an overall score, and trying to be unbiased, well, as unbiased as possible, I'd have to give it an 8.5 because it does bother me a little bit that we don't know conclusively if this series does take place in the main MCU continuity or if it is a multiverse story that takes place in another universe rather than the main one that we're accustomed to. That does bother me a little. Excuse me. Sorry again. But aside from that little minor nitpick, did I like the pacing of the series? Yeah, I did. Was it well written? Yes, I think it was very well written. In particular, in terms of Mark/Steven's part in the series, the characters that Oscar Isaacs played. And yes, I will term it that way because these are two completely separate characters, completely wholly and different from one another. The other thing I will say is I hope people will go back and rewatch this or will watch this for the first time because I think it is a series that is worth revisiting. And even if you've not watched it previously, if my thoughts on it have incentivized you to go check it out, then great. Because I tried to give you all a fair and honest take on the stuff that I cover. I try not to sugarcoat it. If I think it's good, I'm going to say, hey, this is good. And I will say of Moon Knight was good. I would say it's most definitely amongst the strongest of the MCU streaming series that we have gotten thus far. If I was going to rank them, I think I would go this route. It would be WandaVision, then Loki, then Moon Knight, then What If, and then Falcon and Winter Soldier. I think that's all of them. Let's see, WandaVision, Moon Knight, not WandaVision, Falcon, Winter Soldier, Loki, What If. Okay, small rearrangement, very small. It would be WandaVision, Moon Knight, Loki, What If, Hawkeye. No, flip flop, What If, and Hawkeye. And then at the bottom would be Falcon and Winter Soldier. And the only reason I put Falcon and Winter Soldier kind of at the bottom of this list is that the main antagonists, that being the Flag Smashers and their leader, Rory or whatever her first name was, Morgenthau, she just wasn't a particularly good villain or a good antagonist. But yeah, honestly, I very much enjoyed this series. I looked forward to it every week. I had a lot of anticipation for it and everything. And yeah, I'd say Marvel Studios has another solid entry in their MCU streaming series. So we'll just have to wait and see what they've got coming up. But I think I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping up here. Give a few other final thoughts, and then we'll call it a night and everything. I do want to remind you all, I am closing in on 500 subscribers. Had a minor setback thanks to YouTube and their glorious algorithm. I'm back down to 489. So if you come across this stream and you enjoyed my discussion tonight and you're not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Because once we hit 500 subscribers, we're going to do a great big blowout here on the channel. Gonna be doing a watch along for Galaxy Quest. Gonna be doing my very first giveaway, which will be a 4K copy of one of my all-time favorite movies from the 90s, The Fifth Element. And going to be doing a name reveal, namely my own. And I will be tying the name reveal into the giveaway. Basically, what the plan is, I will do a raffle on Twitter and on possibly on Instagram, and everybody gets one entry. The person that guesses my name correctly, and I will say this now: if you already know my first name, sorry, but you're not eligible. I'm trying to keep it fair for everybody, but everybody gets one entry. If you guess my name correctly, you win the prize. So, but also want to let you all know I will be in a couple of weeks starting up another review series for, of course, Obi-Wan. I gave my thoughts on that the other night when I did my Rogue One review. That's also in the Star Wars video playlist if you want to go check that out. And starting next weekend, I'm going to be starting another movie series review. This will be, I'll probably start this Friday because I'm going to have next weekend off because, well, it's like I mentioned at the start of the stream, it's me and Madam Ambassador's 7th wedding anniversary. But going to be doing a movie review series on a series of movies that I love / have issues with, and that is, of course, the films of the X-Men franchise. And I will be doing reviews for X-Men 99, X-Men 2, X-Men United. I will be jumping over a couple of films, and I will be going into X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, and that will be a couple's review. Me and Madam Ambassador are going to do a review for Days of Future Past because that was the first film or the first movie we ever went to see when we started dating, and that movie has a lot of special significance for us. I will also be doing a review for X-Men Apocalypse, for the Wolverine, and for Logan. Now, I will be doing an uploaded video on X-Men The Last Stand and Dark Phoenix because I don't want to dedicate an entire stream to that, but I do want to give some thoughts on those two films and why I think there are issues with them and what I think those issues are and how they potentially could have been corrected and how I hope they might be corrected once the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and all of them are brought into the main MCU continuity. A day, to quote a certain favorite character of mine, that will be a day long remembered, of course. But I've got a lot planned for the channel. Got several other projects or anything. If you've noticed on my social media, particularly on my Twitter, I've got 2 new hashtags: Project Ultra Retro and Project Unity. Project Unity is going to be something pretty big, and I will be releasing a video on that in the near future, along with a few other upload videos or anything, some review videos I'm going to be uploading for the channel, movies that I have been working on doing research on, writing scripts for, and so on. I'm going to be doing a follow-up to my live stream of Blade Runner 2049. And going to be doing a couple other retro review videos as well. So got a lot planned, but the one last thing I will mention is Project Ultra Retro. This will be a video and streaming review series going through cinema of yesteryear, of the 1930s through the 1970s. Now, I have done a couple of entries in that series recently with my review of Alien by Ridley Scott, and of course, by my review of the 10 Commandments that I did a couple weeks ago. And both of those are on my Ultra Retro playlist, so if you want to check those out, they are there. They are available. So, but with all that, folks, I want to thank everybody that tunes in tonight. Of course, if you catch us on the replay, Leave your thoughts down below with how you felt about Moon Knight. Where do you think it ranks in the MCU streaming series so far? Did you like it? Did you hate it? What did you like about it? What did you love about it, or whatever the case may be? So, of course, me and my friends, the Council of Ones, we will be back next Friday afternoon at our proper time, provided nothing haywire goes wrong at work. Um, we will be continuing our review of season 5 of Babylon 5 with the episode and all my dreams torn asunder. So, but that all being said, folks, you have a great evening. Have a very wonderful weekend, and to all the mothers out there, of course, because none of us wouldn't be here without our mothers. To all my friends, to all my fellow ambassadors, a very happy, a very blessed, and a very restful Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to you all. But that all being said, stay ambassadorial. And what do I mean by that? Be respectful, be kind, be yourself, be jovial, and never be afraid to be yourself. So truly be ambassadorial. And this is the ambassador, signing off.